Nara had counted 11 loose threads on the rope before the bidding opened. She wasn't thinking about the auction. She wasn't thinking about the 80 coins her uncle had decided she was worth. She was thinking about the rope, specifically about thread number 9, which was longer than the others and curling at the end like it was trying to escape. She understood that. The hall smelled like pine resin and old wood, and too many people standing in one place. 3 long tables were arranged in a horseshoe shape in front of the platform. Men with ledgers sat at all 3. They had the same face, not physically, but the same expression, the kind you get when you've been doing the same job so long that the job has started to live inside your face, without paying rent. She was the 6th tribute item of the morning. Item 6. The elder of her pack, her uncle technically, though they had never been a warm family kind of family, stood to her left reading from a scroll. He was reading the debt, 3 years of it. Her mother's debt, technically, but her mother had been gone 4 winters now, and debt doesn't care who dies. Debt just looks around for the next available person and introduces itself. Omega designation, her uncle said. Unclaimed. Debt principal, 80 coins. 80 coins. She had done the math on the walk over. 80 coins bought a month of grain, not even a good month. A lean month where you stretched things. It bought 3 pairs of boots, the cheap kind with the thin sole. It bought a winter blanket and maybe half of another one. It did not buy, for instance, a person. But nobody had asked her opinion on that. The men at the tables wrote things down. Nobody looked at her face. One of them, ink-stained cuffs, bored shoulders, the kind of man who had clearly been somewhere more important before this and intended to return, reached for his coin purse and began sorting through it with his thumb. Nara looked at thread number 12. It was shorter than the others. Stubborn. Opening bid, said the auctioneer. The bidding was not exciting. Nobody competed. Nobody wanted her badly enough to compete. The number sat at 40, moved to 60, settled at 80, with the same energy as a man picking up a dropped fork. No drama, just ledger work. 80 coins. She thought, at least grain is useful. She was very careful not to think anything after that. The ink-stained delegate reached for the purse. His hand was halfway to the table. Stop. One word. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It simply arrived in the room and the room went quiet, in the way a room does when the person speaking has never once in their life needed to raise their voice to be heard. The delegate's hand stopped. The coin purse hung in the air between his palm and the table like it had forgotten what gravity was. Nara's eyes moved to the back of the hall. She had noticed him come in the way you notice a change in weather before you look out the window. Something shifts in the quality of the air, some pressure adjusts, and your body knows before your brain does. He had arrived mid-routine. The elder had been mid-sentence. 3 delegates had been mid-conversation. None of those things finished. They all just stopped, and the room reorganized itself around the fact of him the way water reorganizes around a stone. The Alpha King. He was not supposed to be here. He sent representatives. Everyone in the hall knew this, because it was simply how things worked. He was supposed to be 3 territories north, dealing with a border dispute and the kind of political machinery that kept kingdoms running. Not here. Not at a small tributary auction in a border pack hall with pine resin walls and creaking floorboards. But here he was. He had taken the throne without ceremony, the way some people sit down in a chair they have always owned. His general had been whispering into his ear. Context briefing, she guessed, the what is happening here of it, and his eyes had moved once across the platform and stopped. Not at the tribute table, not at the delegates. At her. Then the briefing continued, and his eyes didn't move. She hadn't looked directly. Looking directly cost something, she had learned, and she had learned to be economical about things that cost her. But she had taken him in through peripheral vision the way you watch a fire, aware of it without letting it catch. He was not what she'd expected. She hadn't expected anything, actually, because she had spent 0 seconds in her life thinking about what the Alpha King looked like. But if she had, she would have expected something more deliberate, more armored. What she got was a man who moved like he had nowhere to be because everywhere was already his, which is a different thing entirely. He was not decorated, no ceremonial dress, a dark coat, plain, the kind of plain that costs more than ornate but doesn't tell you that. And now he was standing. He hadn't said anything after the first word. Just stood. His general reached up and tugged his sleeve once, very slightly, the gesture of a man who has done this before and knows it never works. The Alpha King didn't look down. He was already walking, not fast, not slow, the pace of someone who has never in their life had to hurry because things wait for him. Down the center of the hall, past the first delegate table, past the second, past her uncle who was doing something with his face that she had never seen her uncle's face do before, a specific kind of stillness that meant he was trying to figure out how to look like he had expected this. He stopped in front of the platform. He looked at the elder. "Cancel the debt." Her uncle opened his mouth. "My lord, the bid has already—" "I know what the bid is." He said it the same way you might say yes or no. "Simple. Already done. I will cover it. A beat. The full debt," he said. 3 years. Her uncle went a particular color. The delegates looked at each other. The general behind the Alpha King closed his eyes briefly. Not shock, just the particular exhaustion of a man who has learned to take these things in stride. 3 years of debt. That was not 80 coins. That was not anything close to 80 coins. That was the number behind the number, the actual weight of everything her mother had borrowed and everything that had compounded around it, the true ceiling of what her uncle had been holding over her head since the funeral. He said it the way other men might say the weather. Then he turned, and he looked at her, not at the rope, not at the designation plate hanging around her neck on a cord, not at the platform or the space 3 inches to the left of her face the way people usually looked when they were technically looking at her without actually seeing her, at her face. The way you look at something when you have found the thing you were looking for and you are simply confirming it is there. She felt thread 12 against her wrist. She focused on it. She was very busy focusing on it. He said, "Nara Voss, not the Omega, not the tribute, not item 6. Her name, her actual name, both parts, first and last, in the correct order, spoken out loud in a room full of people who had spent the morning calling her a debt figure. She had not heard her name spoken aloud since her mother died. She did not think about that. She refused to think about that. Her legs were already deciding things without consulting her. Someone had cut the rope. She hadn't even noticed. A blade had appeared from somewhere in his people's direction, and then the rope was just gone, and her wrists were free, and her hands were doing that thing where they didn't know what to do without the weight of the rope. She held them slightly apart from her body, like she was still carrying something, like the rope was still there but had simply become invisible. She walked, because he was walking, and there was nowhere else to go, and her legs had already decided. The hall watched. All of it. Every delegate, every pack representative, every ledger man with his ink-stained cuffs. Her uncle watched with his new face, the one she had never seen before. The auctioneer had stopped mid-sentence and not started again. She did not look back. She thought, this might be worse. She thought, 80 coins was at least a number she understood. The doors opened, and they were in the corridor, and the stone was cool under her feet, and the sound of the hall dropped behind them like a curtain falling. His people moved around her efficiently. 2 of them. Not unkind, not warm, simply professional in the way a machine is professional. No sentiment about it, just function. One of them put a cloak around her shoulders. She hadn't been cold. She hadn't noticed she was cold. She noticed now. She walked beside him because the corridor was only wide enough for that, and because there was no alternative direction. He hadn't spoken again. He hadn't explained anything, not to the room, not to her, not to his general who was walking 2 steps behind with the expression of a man doing very complicated arithmetic in his head. She thought about the debt number, the real one. She had never actually known the full amount, only that it was large, only that it was the reason she was standing on auction platforms instead of doing literally anything else with her existence. And he had said it like it was nothing, like it was the price of a cup of something hot. Who does that? Who walks into a room unannounced, names a number that large, says it like weather, and then turns and says your name? She glanced at the side of his face. He was looking straight ahead. She looked straight ahead. They walked. The corridor was long, the old kind of long where the architect had been thinking about importance rather than efficiency. Stone walls, high ceiling, torches that were doing more work than they needed to, because whoever maintained them believed in a large safety margin for darkness. She thought about the rope again, the phantom weight of it. Her hands kept expecting to feel it, and kept not feeling it, and didn't know what to do with the absence. She pressed them flat against her thighs, which was better, more defined, less like she was reaching for something that wasn't there. He stopped. She almost didn't. She caught herself one step past him, and stopped, and turned slightly and looked at him, which was the most direct she had looked at him so far, and she noticed three things in quick order. First, that he was taller than she had registered when they were standing at different heights on a platform. Second, that he still wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wall, specifically at a place on the wall that had nothing on it. Third, that the general behind them had silently increased the gap between himself and the Alpha King to approximately a polite country mile. He said, "You were counting." A statement, not a question. She waited. The threads. On the rope. Her chest did something. She was not going to name what it did. She was going to treat it as a structural event that had occurred and move forward. "You had 11, he said, before the bidding opened. He kept walking. She stood in the corridor for a moment longer than was probably dignified, staring at the back of his coat. He had been watching her the whole time. She didn't know what to do with that. Her whole life, she had stood in rooms and been a number on a ledger and been a figure in somebody else's accounting. Nobody watched. Nobody looked at her face. Nobody counted what she was counting. He had been watching her count. She started walking, because what else do? You walk. Her legs had been making better decisions than the rest of her all morning, so she let them keep going. He didn't slow down to wait for her. He also didn't speed up to lose her. He simply walked at his pace, and she found it, and matched it, and they walked together through the long corridor that smelled like old stone and torch oil and something she didn't have a name for yet. Outside, there was light, the real kind, winter thin but genuine. She felt it on her face and did not react to it, which she was proud of, because her first instinct was to close her eyes and stand there for a second, and she had already done enough things today that she didn't understand without adding more. The pack that had sold her would be packing up their ledgers now. Her uncle would be counting the coins. The delegate with the ink-stained cuffs would be finding something more interesting to think about. The auctioneer would have moved on to item 7. The rope would be in a pile on the floor of the platform with the other ropes. She thought about that more than she meant to. His convoy was at the outer gate, 4 vehicles and a number of people who had the particular quality of having been waiting without complaint. They looked at her without expression, which was not nothing. People who look at you without expression have usually been told something. She didn't know what they'd been told. She didn't know anything. She had been sold for 80 coins, and a man who commanded kingdoms had said her name in front of everyone who had ever priced her, and now she was standing in winter light outside a pack hall with a borrowed cloak around her shoulders, and absolutely no map for what came next. His general appeared at her elbow. He was a solid-looking man, the kind of solid that comes from a long time of dealing with situations that don't have neat solutions. He said, "There's a vehicle waiting, if you're comfortable." He said it carefully, with the specific care of someone who has been briefed on being careful. She looked at him. "What did he tell you about me?" she asked. The general blinked. "Once. Then, he said to be respectful." That's it. That was sufficient. She thought about that. 2 words of instruction, and a general who looked like he'd managed military campaigns was being careful with his language around her. She didn't know whether that was reassuring or alarming. Both, maybe. They weren't mutually exclusive. She got in the vehicle. It was warm inside. She hadn't expected that either. She kept not expecting things and then finding them, which was disorienting in a specific way she didn't have a word for. She sat against the far wall and pulled the cloak tighter and watched the pack hall get smaller through the small rectangular window as they moved. He wasn't in this vehicle. She was alone, except for one of his people near the front, who wasn't looking at her, just sitting forward and keeping their eyes on nothing in particular, the way a professional does when they're trying not to intrude. She looked at her hands. The marks from the rope were still there. Red lines across the wrists. Not deep, not permanent, just a record of the morning sitting on her skin in a language that didn't need translation. 80 coins. She had done the math on the walk over, and she kept doing it now, as if repetition would eventually make the number make a different kind of sense. It didn't. It kept coming up the same. Less than a blanket. Less than a good month of grain. Less than what any reasonable person would assign to another person if they had to sit down and think about it. Her uncle hadn't sat down and thought about it. He had needed a number that covered the debt, and she was the number he had available. That was the whole of it. She had known this. She had known it for 4 winters. The full span of the debt, the full span of her mother being gone, and the full span of herself becoming the most convenient solution to a financial inconvenience. She had known it, and she had made her peace with it in the way you make peace with things that are too large to fight. You simply stop letting them be surprising. They are weather. You wear appropriate clothing and you keep walking. What she had not made peace with was her name. She pressed her wrists against her thighs again. He had said it the way you say the name of something you already knew before you arrived. Like he had done the work of knowing it somewhere private, and the saying of it out loud was just the confirmation. The public part. And he had said it in public specifically. She understood that now, sitting in the moving vehicle with the pack haul getting smaller behind her. He hadn't pulled her aside. He hadn't whispered a number to a delegate. He had walked the length of the hall and said her name where everyone could hear it, where her uncle could hear it, where every man who had listed her as item 6 could hear it. She didn't know what to do with that either. It kept happening. She would pick up a piece of it to examine and find it was too big to hold at one angle. She would have to put it down and pick it up from a different direction. Her hands were still. The marks on her wrists were still there. Outside the window, the border-packed territory was giving way to open road. She was going somewhere she had never been, with a man she didn't know, who had said her name like he already did. Her legs, for the first time all morning, didn't have an opinion about where to go next. So she sat. She looked out the window. She watched the trees move past in the thin winter light, dark and regular and ongoing, in the way trees are ongoing, not caring about debt or auctions or the arithmetic of what a person costs. She thought about her mother, not for long, just for the space of one breath. Just long enough to feel the specific shape of that particular absence, the one she carried around like a stone in her pocket that she had learned to forget was heavy until a quiet moment reminded her. Her mother would have found this funny, not the auction, not that part, but the rest of it. The way the room had reorganized around one word, the way the general had been careful with his language, the way she was sitting in a warm vehicle with a borrowed cloak, wondering what comes next, which was a more interesting problem than the one she had woken up with. Her mother had believed in interesting problems, said they were better than boring answers. She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling of the vehicle, which had nothing on it, and let the movement rock her slightly. She thought, I am going to need a better theory of what is happening. She thought, I will make one when I have more data. She thought, 80 coins. And then she let herself feel it. Not the sale. She had been performing not feeling it all morning with impressive discipline. Not the number, not the uncle with his ledger, just the name, just the way it had sounded in a room full of people who didn't know it. Nara Voss. Both parts. Correct order. Out loud. She closed her eyes. The vehicle moved through open road, and outside the window the trees kept going, dark and ongoing, and not caring about anything. The marks on her wrists were fading already. She could feel the skin cooling as the redness settled. By morning, they would be gone. He had been watching her count. 11 threads. He had known the exact number. Before the bidding, before the word that stopped the room, before he walked the length of the hall and said her name, he had been sitting on that throne watching her count threads on a fraying rope, and he had counted with her. She opened her eyes. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did the only thing her legs had been recommending all morning. She kept going. The convoy arrived at the northern gate of his territory after dark. She had slept without meaning to. Not deeply. Not well. the kind of sleep that happens when your body decides the argument is over and takes what it can. She woke up when the vehicle stopped and sat up and looked out the window and saw stone walls lit by torches and guards who stood like they had been standing there since the beginning of things and intended to stand there until the end. Big. That was the word for the place. Everything was proportioned for something larger than ordinary living. The gate was tall enough that she tilted her head back and still didn't find the top immediately. The courtyard beyond it had the specific gravity of a place that had been important for a very long time and knew it. She stepped out of the vehicle. Cold air. Real cold. Different from the border pack cold, which was a wet cold, the kind that settles into cloth and stays there. This was a dry cold, the kind with edges. She pulled the borrowed cloak tighter and watched his people move around the courtyard with the efficient choreography of a company that had arrived home many times and had it memorized. He was already out of his vehicle. He was talking to two people she didn't recognize. Advisors, she guessed, from the way they were holding papers and the way he was not looking at the papers, just listening with the patience of a man who will ask the one question that matters at the end and does not need to read along to find it. She stood near the vehicle and did not move. Not because she was afraid, because she didn't have instructions. She was good at following instructions, had spent 4 years being excellent at it, and now she had none, and the absence of them was a different kind of rope. One of his people, a woman, the first she had seen among his staff, with the kind of practical face that suggested she managed things that didn't want to be managed, appeared at her elbow. "I'll take you to your rooms," she said. Not unkindly. Nara looked at her. "My rooms, yes." "Not a room, no." The woman's expression didn't flicker. "Rooms. You can ask for changes in the morning, once you've had a chance to see what's there." She had never had rooms. She had had a room. One room that she had shared, in the good years, and occupied alone, in the less good years. One room was the full extent of her personal geography. "All right," she said. She followed the woman across the courtyard and through a door and into a corridor that was better lit than the one in the border pack hall, the torches more recent, the stone cleaner. And then up a staircase and through another door and into a set of 3 rooms that were more space than she had occupied in 4 years, just standing in the first one looking at it. Fire already going. Someone had anticipated her arrival with wood and timing. Bed that was, objectively, an insane amount of bed for one person. A window that looked out over the courtyard, and through the courtyard the dark outline of trees that went on for a long time in the dark. The woman with the practical face said, "Dinner will be brought up. Is there anything you need tonight?" She thought about the question seriously. Needs. What did she need? She needed a better theory of what was happening. She needed approximately 10 hours of information before she could construct one. She needed to understand what it meant that she was standing in rooms plural with a fire going that someone had lit in advance of her arrival. "No," she said. "Thank you." The woman left. She stood in the first room for a while, just stood there and let the fire be warm, and the room be real, and the day sort of settle around her like snow settling. She thought about the rope. She was going to need to stop thinking about the rope. She walked to the window and looked out. The courtyard was quieter now. Most of his people dispersed back into their routines. One torch near the far gate threw a long orange shadow. The dark trees behind the wall held still. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. He had watched her count 11 threads. She didn't know what that meant. She was good at knowing what things meant. She had spent 4 years reading rooms and reading people and reading the distance between what someone said and what they were actually doing, because survival required that kind of reading. But this she couldn't read. There was no category in her 4 years of data that matched a man who watches you count threads on the rope they've put around your wrists and then walks a room's length to say your name where everyone can hear it. No category. She would need to build one. She let her hand fall from the glass. The fire popped once. Outside, the courtyard torch threw its shadow in a slightly different direction as the flame moved. She thought, he said stop, and the coin purse stopped in midair. She thought, one word. She thought, my name in his mouth was 2 words, and it stopped something in me that I am going to pretend was not stopped. She sat down on the edge of the bed, which was, as noted, an insane amount of bed, and looked at her hands in her lap. The marks from the rope were almost gone now, just a faint suggestion of pink across both wrists. By morning, nothing. Just her regular hands, which had been unremarkable up to this point, and were still unremarkable, but were now sitting in rooms that were warm and not earned, not paid for, not explained. There was a knock. Dinner, probably. She said come in, and it was dinner, brought by a young man who moved quietly and put things on the table near the fire without making anything into a thing, and left again without requiring conversation, which she appreciated at a cellular level. She ate. The food was better than anything she had eaten in 4 years, and she ate all of it without drama, because she was practical, and she was hungry, and there was no point pretending otherwise. She washed her face with the water they'd left. She looked in the mirror, which was better than the mirror she had owned, the reflection clearer, the surface not warped. She looked at herself for a moment. Same face, same eyes, same arrangement of features that had looked back at her since she was small. She thought, I am in the same face and a completely different place. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. She lay on her back in the large dark and listened to the fire settle, and thought about nothing very deliberately, which is a skill that takes practice, and she had practiced it for 4 winters. The trick is not to push the thoughts away, because they are stronger than you are, and pushing just gives them something to push back against. The trick is to simply not follow them. Let them arrive. Let them sit. Don't invite them to stay. The rope. Let it sit. The 80 coins. Let it sit. Her uncle's new face. Let it sit. Her name in his mouth. She let that one sit for a long time. Then she closed her eyes. Outside, the dark trees held still in the cold. The torches in the courtyard burned through the night the way torches do, with steady indifference, not caring what they illuminate, just doing the job of light against dark for as long as the oil lasts. In the morning, there would be things to understand, a new territory, new rules, a situation with no category that she would need to build a category for. In the morning, she would start the work of knowing where she was. Tonight, she just lay in the warm dark with the fire settling and let herself not know, which was, she realized as she finally crossed into sleep, not entirely terrible. It was not a rescue. She was clear on that. She was clear on it in the way that mattered. Not the performed clarity of someone who is secretly hoping to be wrong, but actual clarity, the kind that comes from long acquaintance with how the world distributes its exceptions. The world does not hand out rescues. What happened in that hall was something, but it was not that. What it was, she would have to find out. She would be methodical about it. She would observe and collect data and build the category from what she found. She was good at that. She had been doing it since she was small, since before her mother was gone, since before the debt and the designation and the auction platform. She had always been good at looking at things without flinching and understanding what she saw. It was the skill she had that nobody had ever priced, which meant it was the only thing she actually owned. She was going to use it. She went to sleep. The fire burned down to coals. Her hands lay open on the blanket, loose and uncurled, and without a rope to count. The marks on her wrists were gone. The day was done. The 80 coins were somewhere on a table in a border pack hall that she would probably never see again, and her name was somewhere in the air of a stone corridor, and the Alpha King was somewhere in this large building with his general and his advisors, and whatever it cost him to do what he had done, which she did not know the full price of yet. But she would find out. She was patient. She was very patient. She had been counting threads her whole life, and nobody had ever noticed. He had noticed. That was one data point. She would collect more.